This is standard form for a quadratic, and the reason it is quadratic is because x is squared. If x is squared, how many answers does it have? 2. And you get one answer from this equation and one answer from that equation. And what's the only difference between those two equations? This one has adding and this one has subtracting. So because we are lazy people, instead of writing the whole thing down twice, the quadratic formula is usually written like this with a plus minus sign. But that's what the plus minus sign means, that there's one answer when you add this part to it and another answer when you subtract this part from it. And do we recognize this b squared minus 4ac stuff? That's what we were doing on Friday when we were using the discriminant. This part underneath the square root sign is the discriminant. And when I figure out a problem, the first thing needs, this has to be in standard form. So to put it in standard form, I subtract 3 from both sides. Now, this quadratic formula looks quite complicated, doesn't it? It is quite complicated, and it is, even if you had one, which you don't at the moment, it is very difficult to get all of that into the calculator in one step. It's easier to break it apart. And so I'm going to divide my paper into 2 parts, not exactly halfway down the paper, maybe like a third. I'm going to block off a part over here. And this part is a little bit bigger than that part. And on this part over here, I'm going to figure out the discriminant first, like we were doing on Friday. The a is equal to 2, the b is equal to negative 5, and the c is equal to negative 3. And the discriminant is b squared minus 4ac. And negative 5 squared is positive 25 minus 4ac. And minus a minus will make this a plus. And 4 times 2 is 8, and 8 times 3 is 24, and that would be equal to 49. Now, where do we find this discriminant? So I'm going to go ahead and take the square root of 49. Did you see I skipped a space there because I'm going to write something down? Is 49 a perfect square number? That means when I'm all finished with the quadratic formula over here, I am going to have 2 real rational answers or roots. When I'm all done, I'm going to have 2 real rational roots. Real means it's not going to have an I in it. Rational for this purposes means it's not going to have a square root, because the square root of 49 is 7. And so it's not going to have a square root anymore because that's a perfect square. Okay, so my formula is minus b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac. This part is under the square root with a 2a on the bottom. This formula starts with what? Minus and the b is a minus 5. This minus is from the formula. This minus is from the minus 5. Plus or minus. Now, we already figured this part right here out. This part right here is 7, because we already did the square root part of it too. All divided by 2a. And minus a minus makes a positive. And the plus or minus is just a shortcut way to write down the two answers. So now we need to break it apart. We have 5 plus 7 over 4, and we have 5 minus 7 over 4. To get the two real answers, we're going to have to break it into the plus and the minus part. So what's 5 plus 7? 12 divided by 4 is... And what's 5 minus 7? And so we never leave our answers. Our fractions always have to be reduced. So that is minus 1/2. We have two real rational answers. No square roots, no i's. For our second example, x squared equals 6x plus 20. Before we can do anything else, we have to have it in standard form. So I need to subtract 6x and subtract 20 from both sides of the equation to zero all of this out. Then, just to keep my paper a little bit, I'm going to do the discriminant over here, and then I'm going to do the rest of the quadratic formula here. So what is the a? When there's no number in front of the x squared, the a is 1. B is negative 6. C is negative 20. B squared minus 4ac. Negative 6 squared is positive 36. Minus a minus would make a positive. This discriminant is underneath the square root sign, so I need to take the square root of 116. Is 116 a perfect square number? 10 times 10 would be 100. 11 times 11 would be 121. That's in between them. This is not a perfect square number. That means when I'm all done with this problem, I am going to have two irrational roots. Irrational means it's going to still have the square root sign in it. But 116 can be simplified with the birthday cake. So down here somewhere, 116 can divide by 2. I'm all the way off. 116 can divide by 2. 58 can divide by 2. What divides into 29? Nope. 3 goes into 27. 4 goes into 28. So 29's perfect. The only thing that divides 29 is 29. Why do we do the birthday cake? To find the pairs. This has a pair of 2's, and the 29 does not have a pair. So that is the simplified version. This is equal to this part right here. Minus a minus 6. This minus is from the formula. This minus is from the minus 6. Plus or minus, we just figured all that part out. And minus a minus makes a... Now, you see this line that goes all the way across? The line that goes all the way across means that that 6 is divided by 2. 2 times 1 is just 2. And it means that this funny looking number is divided by 2. That's what the line going all the way across means. It means both of those terms are divided by 2. I break it up so I can reduce it a little bit more. What's 6 divided by 2? And then those 2's cancel. And that is our 2 irrational root answers. It's irrational because it has the square root sign. Do you see 2 answers there? What are the 2 answers? Those are the 2 answers. We just write it together like that because we're lazy and we don't want to have to write it out 2 times. But that's what this means, that it's 3 plus the square root of 29. The square root of 29 would be 5 point something. So this would be 8 point something. And then it would be 3 subtract that. And so that would be 2 point something if I figured it out in decimal form. But it represents 2 separate numbers. But we just write it like that for convenience. Four x squared equals 4x minus 1. What has to happen first? What does it have to be equal to before I can get started? 0. It has to be equal to 0. How do you make it equal to 0? And so I need to subtract 4x from both sides and add 1 to both sides. X squared minus 4x plus 1 equals 0. Just to make my paper a little bit less messy, because this is kind of a messy problem, I divide it into 2 parts, and I'm going to figure out the discriminant first. And so this is b squared minus 4ac, and so that would be 16 minus 4 times 1. So what's that equal to? And what's the square root of 0? And so that means when I'm all done over here, I'm going to have 1 real root. Equals minus b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac. This part underneath the square root divided by 2a. So this is going to have a minus from a formula, and then it's going to have a minus 4 from here, plus or minus 0, all divided by 2 times 4. But minus a minus makes a. So I have 4 plus 0 divided by 8. And I have 4 minus 0 divided by 8. So what's 4 plus 0 divided by 8? Just be 4 over 8, which reduces to 1/2. 4 minus 0 would be 4 divided by 8, which reduces to 1/2. I get the same answer both times because when you add 0 and you subtract 0, you get the same thing. And so there is just one unique answer. And I believe I told you the other day that this would be called a double root. Is it obvious why it's called a double root? You got 1/2 for both of the answers. And so we usually don't write it twice. We just say that x is equal to 1/2. This is already equal to 0. If I was trying to factor it, I would start off by factoring out the GCF of -2. But you don't have to do that when you're using the quadratic formula. And C is equal to -6. And so B squared minus 4AC. So that would be a 16 minus 4AC. Minus times a minus times another minus. Minus times a minus would be positive times another minus would turn it back negative. 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times 6 is 48. What happens when you put a negative number under the radical sign? You have to break it up like that, and that would be equal to I times the square root of 32. There's going to be an I in the answer. I am going to have 2 complex roots or answers when I'm done. The answer is going to have an I in it. 32 is also not a perfect square number, so I have to simplify the 32. So this is equal to a pair of 2's times another pair of 2's, and I had an I on the outside, and then I have this 2 left over. This is equal to 4I square root of 2. X equals minus B plus or minus B squared minus 4AC, all divided by 2A, minus B, plus or minus. We just figured out all of this part right here. 4I square roots of 2. In order to simplify a little bit, the line that goes all the way across, 2 times 2 would be -4 divided by a -4 would be 4 divided by 4 would cancel out the 4s. Now, there is a negative sign, but you're going to be adding plus this number and minusing this number, so you're still going to be plussing and minusing it. So this minus sign doesn't really matter because we are adding and subtracting it. And so that is the reduced answer. That represents two answers, one plus I square roots of 2 and one minus I square roots of 2. And both of those answers have an I in the answer. What has to happen first? Has to be in standard form equal to 0. Then I'm going to figure out my discriminant. B squared minus 4AC. So that's going to be 9 minus 4AC. Minus and minus is going to make a plus. 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times 7 is 56. So what is 9 plus 56? Did I add right? So, is that a perfect square number? If it's not a perfect square number, then I need to do the birthday cake on it. And the smallest number that's going to divide that is going to be a 5. 5 will go into that. So 13's a prime number, so the only thing that goes into 13 is 13. Does it have any pairs? So it does not simplify. That's it. So it doesn't simplify anymore, so I'm ready to do my quadratic formula. So this is going to be minus 3 plus or minus the square root of 65 divided by 2 times 2. What is 2 times 2? Don't change the number in the middle of the problem. That was a 65. Now, you can write the answer like that because if I divided it apart, would anything reduce more? No. And so you can write the answer like that, or you can write the answer like that. Both of them would be correct forms of the quadratic formula. And the only way to learn to do the quadratic formula is to practice the quadratic formula.